just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to.
Okay.
And hello, everyone. If you're joining us, thank you for joining us today. We'll get started very shortly. Okay, it looks like we have a pretty decent crowd, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm Kyla Miller, the political organizer for the Carolyn Bordeaux for Congress campaign. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for this Divine Nine Roundtable. We have representatives from Kappa. I'm not going to go through it, but they will let you know who they are. I just want to make it very clear that these candidates are here personally. They don't represent their campaign. The organizations themselves are not publicly endorsing or supporting Carolyn's campaign. They're just here as representatives for themselves. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Carolyn to get us started.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody. Could we go around and just have everybody introduce themselves really quickly? I'm just going to call names out as you are on my computer. So to my right is Chris Hankins. Can you just introduce yourself?
Hello, Carolyn. Hello, panel. My name is Chris Hankins, and I live in the Gwinnett County area, Decula, and through my, but in the corporate strategy profession, I work for Assurant, a very large global insurance company. And in short, just happy to be here tonight and to be a part of this. I am a member of a Beta Psi Phi fraternity, and just looking for ways to engage candidates and find out how those particular candidates can help me and my organization, further its mission. So glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. All right, Prudence, I've got you next.
Sure. Yes, so I'm Prudence, and I live in the Peachtree Corners area of Gwinnett County. An engineer, engineering director in the telecom space, where I've been for about 30 years. And I'm, socially active. I like to participate in my community, and I am a member of Zeta Phi Beta through Sigma Omicron Zeta of Gwinnett County. And like Chris, I'm here to ask questions to see what your take is on issues that affect me and my community.
Yeah, thank you. Richard Bradley.
Hi, Carolyn. Hello, fellow panelists. My name is Richard Bradley. I am currently serve as the president of Rho Beta Sigma alumni chapter of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. I serve as a senior accountant for a large organization that we franchise retail and restaurant locations within airports. Like my soror Prudence, very socially active in the community. We try to do what we can for our constituents in the county, and waiting to hear some more strategies and tactics to make our voice even greater heard. And pretty excited to be here.
Thank you for coming. Manuel Solomon.
Good evening, fellow panelists. I am Manuel Solomon. I am a member of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated through the Sigma Eta Lambda chapter located in Walton County. And we're excited to be here today to discuss hopeless people. It's very important to our fraternity. It's one of our national programs. So I look forward to engaging with you all and the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. James Bruin.
All right. Okay, want to make sure I got myself unmuted. Good evening, Carolyn. You may not recall, you and I have met each other a couple of different times. One of those you may recall was at a reception in 2018, I think, with Representative Jim Clyburn.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
it's
Yes.
been some
Popular.
time, so we have talked before.
Yeah.
As I was getting ready to say, my name is James Bruin. I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, same chapter as Chris Hankins is in, and I live here in Gwinnett County. I currently am one who is employed with the SBA, the Small
Okay.
Business Administration Disaster Assistance. I'm sure you're well aware of that. I work with the admin department, and I'm one who is very socially conscious and involved in the community. My mother is a retired teacher, and my father as well was one involved with the community. So it just comes natural to my siblings and I to do our part in our community where we reside. I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to interacting, engaging with you, and seeing where we can help to continue to build within Gwinnett as it continues to evolve and with this diversity and so forth.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Kamala, am I saying your name right?
Kamala, it's
Kamala.
Kamala. Thank you, and thank you for including us in this roundtable discussion. I truly appreciate it. I am a member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, Mu Epsilon Sigma Alumni Chapter out of Roswell, Georgia. I am a HR professional by trade with learning and development. And I just look forward to being a part of this discussion, to be able to just talk about things that are very important to our community and things that are going on in our community right now. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Okay, and then Alex.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alec Northington, originally a native of Hampton, Virginia, currently reside in Lawrenceville, Georgia. I'm a graduate of the University of Cincinnati undergrad and the University of St. Thomas, where I obtained my MBA. Currently, I am actually the Political Action Committee chairman of the Lawrenceville Duluth Alumni Chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. And I am very happy to be here and to meet all of you all remotely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming. And thanks to Kyla for organizing this. And thank you guys so much for participating. I just, I want to make sure as a part of this campaign that, and going on past it, hopefully, right, that I'm reaching out to the Black community in multiple different dimensions, and just having a chance to hear what your concerns are, visit with you, talk about what we're trying to accomplish with the campaign. A little bit of background on myself. I am the daughter of teachers. I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, in the mountains of Virginia, and my parents were really very passionately committed to public education. And my mother would go on to be a principal of a high school. My father would go on to run the Title I program for disadvantaged students in the state of Virginia. So very much part of the fabric of my life. The turning point in my life, which is an odd twist it took, was when I was in high school. My father got burned out of teaching, and he decided to leave his tenured job and to go into business for himself, selling paper animal hats on the streets. Odd twist, right? Didn't see that coming. Neither did we. But we would do 54 craft shows a year. And every weekend, the vans would roll out from our driveway, and I would go stand out on the streets of some city with a beautiful unicorn hat on my head, and I would hawk hats on the streets. And I tell folks, I never thought those skills would be useful, but now that I'm running for office, there's starting to see that God has a purpose in everything. So I was young people from Roanoke, Virginia, and from my family never really thought about going to college in the Northeast, and or much like an Ivy League school. But I'd written this really cheeky essay about how you sell a paper hat in the rain. It was for a high school class, and someone handed me an application to Yale University. And literally the night before it was due, I thought, oh heck, I'll give it a try. I slapped on that essay, which is about 5 pages over the limit, and I sent it in, and I got in. And it was this really amazing thing for my family and community that here was this local girl who had made good. But while I was there, we hit the recession of the early 90s, and the hat business went under. My family went bankrupt, and we lost everything, including our house. And there was obviously some question about whether I would continue at this marvelous university. But I ended up going on a Pell Grant, Perkins loans, Stafford loans. People in the community chipped in to help me make it. I worked very, very long hours, and I made it through. And at the end of my time, the student loan officer sat me down and said, young lady, you have an extraordinary amount of debt. You need to get a job right away. And so I carry a soft spot in my heart, certainly for young people who really struggle with that and who have to really work their way through school. But my father sat me down and he said, Carolyn, I don't want you to forget that your country and your community really invested in you. They gave you this world-class education. And with it comes a responsibility and a duty to give it back. And that conversation, there are these turning points in your life where you're like, okay, that's what I'm going to do with my life. And so I said, okay, my life is about public service. That's just what I'm going to do. I had no idea where to start with that, but I thought, oh, right, I'll try Washington, D.C. And so I took the train from New Haven, Connecticut, down to Washington, D.C. And then I went door to door to any member of Congress with whom I had some connection. I said, I am your constituent, hire me. And eventually my grandmother's congressman's scheduler knew the chief of staff of Ron Wyden from Oregon, and I ended up working for him. And learned a lot by working for him. He is somebody, he's still there today. He's in the Senate now. He was in the House when I started working for him. And I just learned a lot about public policy. He's somebody who is progressive. He's fiscally responsible. And he was actually bipartisan. Every bill he worked on, he would go out and find some Republican who would work with him on it to try to build a coalition to get the job done. And I had a wonderful time. He loved finding sort of innovative ideas that help solve problems for people. So as an example of that, one of the first pieces of legislation I worked on, and this was back in the early 90s, was to allow residents of public housing to vote to ban guns in public housing. And we worked on this, and the co-sponsor, one of the leading co-sponsors he worked with, was Congressman John Lewis. And so it was the first time I had a chance to work with Congressman Lewis, who was, of course, this huge hero for me. And that was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I worked on a host of different issues, everything from social policy to education, housing. I worked on transit and transportation policy as well. After doing that for about 5 years, I went back and I got a master's and a PhD in public administration with a focus in public finance. And I came to Georgia to teach at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies in 2003. And I have been there ever since. I'm very committed to Georgia State and the Andrew Young School. And there are several important things about that. The first is it's a university with a real commitment to educating first-generation college students. And that is something very appealing to me as somebody who struggled, and had to work hard to get through school. And it actually graduates more Black students than any other university in the country, and is very proud, and I'm very proud to be a part of that effort. It also really has a commitment to public service, that you are, yes, you're teaching and you're doing research, but also it's a school that wants its faculty out in the community and doing work in the community. And so I worked on a host of different projects, but most notably from 2007 to 2010, I was asked by the Republican leadership to come and help them balance the budget during the Great Recession, which was this terrible fiscal crisis that they faced. And it was very interesting. I'd always worked for Democrats before, but here I was, working for largely, it was a bipartisan position, but largely working for the Republican leadership. And I helped them get through this really terrible crisis, and I got budgets through that passed with broad and bipartisan majorities. And at the end of my time there, I was honored with a special resolution for significant service to the state of Georgia. I went back to Georgia State and I founded the Center for State and Local Finance, which had a mission of good public policy and bringing along the next generation of leaders in public service. So I'm on a new path now as I run for office, and there have been some interesting turning points that have gotten me into this. One was I teach a class called Public Service and Democracy. And of course, my class is at Georgia State. It is very diverse. And I had 4 young Black men who sat on the front row of this class. And I was talking about democracy, and all the different roles of the public agencies and all of this stuff. And one of them raised his hand and he said, Dr. Bordeaux, all we want to know is, how do you change the world? And I have to say that this race is kind of an effort to answer his question. I gave him kind of the academic, well, you can do this or you can do this, you can go work for an agency or a nonprofit, all this stuff. But I was never satisfied with my answer. And a couple things happened. The first is the destruction of our healthcare system. the Affordable Care Act was something that I strongly supported. And after it passed, what I saw was a very conscious effort to destroy that piece of legislation. After it passed, the Republican Congress failed to fund it. They litigated against it. And in Georgia, they failed to expand Medicaid. And by failing to do that, that means Georgia returns to the federal government $2.2 to $3 billion a year, and 500,000 people in this state don't have health insurance because of that. And it is morally wrong, it is fiscally irresponsible, and it just has deeply disturbed me that our elected officials have so badly lost their line of sight to the people of this state. So that was one thing where I started to say, you know, I need to figure out how to make change. How do we change the world? And then on November 9th of 2016, I'll be candid, Donald Trump was elected president. And I remember I had told that class, if Donald Trump is elected president, I will not be standing here in front of you teaching. I'm going to have to do something else. This is not okay. And, you know, this is a president who, or our current president, right? He got his start by challenging Obama's birth certificate. Who had these incredibly, you know, racist, misogynist, you know, talking points. And I just, you know, knew that the policies he put forward would very much reflect his worldview. And that is very much what we have seen. And so I got into this race in July of 2017. I ran against, ultimately, I had a primary, but I ran against a 4-term Republican incumbent who'd never gotten below 60% of the vote. And with an enormous effort, we closed the 20 percentage point gap, and I came within 433 votes of flipping this seat, which was the closest race in the country. And I did that with a tremendous amount of support from the Black community. I want to be clear. You know, I went to the Black churches. I, you know, really wanted to make sure that I was there for the Black community and that I was participating and engaged. I was endorsed by Congressman John Lewis, and he played a very instrumental role in the race. Also by Andrew Young, who has been a really staunch ally, and Congressman Hank Johnson. After that, our current representative decided to retire. I think he saw the writing on the wall. And so it's now an open seat, and I am back in the race. I just, you know, cleared out from under a 6-way primary back in June. And something very, very important happened. 85,000 people voted in the Democratic primary in June. It was up from 30,000 in 2018. And over 50% of those voting in the Democratic primary had never voted in a Democratic primary before. So we're seeing some of the highest growth in new Democratic voter turnout in the country. And the Black community is candidly a huge part of that. The turnout is astonishing. We are now turning our attention to November 3rd. This district is now the #2 prospect for Democratic pickup in the country. And so I am working very hard to finish the job in this district and to put Georgia itself in play for our Senate candidates and for Biden. So I know that you all are nonpartisan, but I will be very clear about why I am here. So, and I really appreciate you all being a part of this.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. So now we're going to get started into our roundtable portion of the event. Just so everyone knows what's going to happen, I'm going to ask the panelists a question, and then they will then respond, add on to their own question, share a personal story, and then Carolyn will then respond. Sounds a little confusing, but once you get the hang of it, we'll, you know.
Okay, you guide me through this, Kyla.
Yeah, you'll see.
Okay.
All right, so the first question is for James Bruin of Omega Sci-Fi. Black and brown communities across our country and Georgia have been negatively affected by generations of racism, discrimination, and unjust public policies. What is your experience with racism, and what would you like your representative to address once elected to Congress?
Okay, I have to unmute.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking, and you only have, I don't have enough time. There's so much to say, but you know, I would just say, as far as an experience, about maybe 2 years ago, I was driving in my car and I was heading back to my office. And I was out on a field visit at that time. I worked in workforce development. And so a police officer pulled me over, and being candid, we were on Ronald Reagan Parkway, was a white guy. And, you know, I knew I wasn't speeding. And so he was just very adamant and somewhat, you know, his vernacular is rude. And so in my mind, I could hear, like I told you, my parents telling me, don't lose your temper, don't lose your temper. And so ultimately, I did get a ticket. And so when I did go to court, you know, call it fate or what you will, but I had a solicitor who worked with me and they threw it out. So what I would like to see is that, you know, we get a person in office who recognizes this and doesn't shun the belief or saying that systemic racism doesn't exist. Because let's be real about this, we know it does exist. So that would be what I would hope that, and to be candid, you know, I did already vote and you did get my vote, Ms. Bordeaux, Dr. Bordeaux, I should say. So, you know, it's a point of one to see where it all comes and where it comes together. There you go, Kyla.
Okay, so now I'm talking. Okay, yeah. So I mean, thank you for sharing your story. And you know what I have tried to do. I know I am white, and is to sit and visit. You know, make sure I am here, and having an ongoing conversation. You know, with people in the Black community. And, you know, I have been to Poplar Hill and I've been to New Mercies and I've been to Salem and I've been to Hopewell, and I've also going to the churches, right. And making sure that I am there and I am in touch, you know, with your experiences. And obviously that is not a new story, right. I've heard that story so many times and it is not okay. It is not okay. And I am very much committed to making sure that we address both as a community, having an ongoing discussion, but also legislatively, that we address police reform and address police brutality. It is not okay that our Black citizens, see a police officer and are harassed by them. That is not okay. And so, I have a series of platform policy ideas out there, from everything from establishing a national registry for police misconduct, making sure that we have national use of force standards that ban chokeholds. We do not give our police military equipment, which research has shown leads them to more violent behavior towards communities of color. That we end qualified immunity so that we can prosecute police officers when they are out of line. And I think part of this is about restoring trust between our police and the Black community. And I think part of it also is going to have to be continuing to work with the churches so that we continue to talk. We bring the police officers into the churches. We make sure we're having a conversation about these issues. They are trained in community policing and that they hire in ways that they look like the community that they are policing. So, and if you have other ideas, I am ready to listen. So thank you.
Yeah, this kind of adds on, the next question kind of adds on to that first question. And it is, this past summer, we saw thousands of people across the country protesting against police brutality, calling for justice for the lives of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, and countless others. In addition to violence at the hands of law enforcement, Black and brown people are incarcerated at a higher rate with stricter and harsher sentences than their white counterparts. What is your plan to address inequalities in our criminal justice system? I know you already talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to give Richard Bradley a chance to respond to this question, and then, you can respond back.
Sorry, thank you, Kyla. In reading this question, it brings back haunting visions, because this is very personal for me. After George Floyd was killed, I was very scared. I'm actually from St. Paul, Minneapolis area, and this is not the first time we've had, rise, but this was the first time we had that level of uprise and kickback to, the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. And with that said, my family is still back there, and it was just watching, the wave just move across the city and watching, the the violence growing. Then, it came within 3 blocks of my childhood home where my sister still lives. It's, I don't know what the answer is, but something has to give where where law enforcement doesn't feel so entitled, where they actually respect lives, no matter, predominantly, of course, Black and brown lives. But has to be an honor and a humility that comes with the badge, and not, a reign of terror, so to speak. And of course, with the criminal justice system, it's imbalanced. There's no other way to put it. It obviously is against Black people when you get the stricter sentences, the 3 strikes, and what have you. So it's just, you don't want to. Sometimes you don't want to leave your house because you're scared if you're arrested, you don't know what's going to be the outcome. You don't know if you're going to make it back home. So it's. I'm just curious to see what can really be done to really make an change going forward.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, dealing with structural racism is something that's going to take time. It is, when you're dealing with hearts and minds, that's one thing, right? That takes an ongoing dialogue and discussion. But I will say, one of the reasons I've supported people like Kibo Taylor for sheriff, and Nicole Love Hendrickson for the county chair. And, they are both Black. And it is partly because I know that they can bring reform to those institutions at a local level. And they are aware, in their hearts, of these kinds of issues. And so that's one place. But criminal justice reform is something that, there are the things I can touch from a policy standpoint, and the things that we have to touch through through dinner tables, and through getting together, and through talking with one another and praying with one another. So from the policy, what I can touch from the policy side is that we need criminal justice reform. And there have been some steps already taken in this respect, but to give you a sense of the imbalance, right? The Black and Hispanic communities make up about 25% of the nation's population, but about 70% of the federal prison population. And this is a result of, well, it goes back quite a way, obviously, but most recently, the spiking in our prison population comes from the war on drugs, the passing of the mandatory minimums. And there is a lot of recognition that this was misguided and very harmful. And we need to go back and repeal the mandatory minimums, particularly the ones for nonviolent drug offenses. We need to decriminalize marijuana, which a law that has been applied with extraordinary, racial disparity. We need another really important thing that people don't think about with respect to criminal justice. Well, let me just go back. There's also just revisiting all the mandatory minimums and looking at sentencing and making sure that as people are moving through that process, that we are identifying places where the Black community is disproportionately affected, from the arrest to the prosecution to the sentencing coming from the judges. And we can do a lot to track that and to identify the points where disparity is occurring. But another big issue, and it goes to one that, one of the big reasons I talked about, which was healthcare. And you don't think about this as being a criminal justice issue. But I was talking with a family the other day, and their son is bipolar. And the only place that he can receive healthcare treatment is in prison, because we don't have healthcare. We don't have health insurance coverage for working people who are lower income. And so basically his pattern is, he's in prison, he gets mental health treatment, he gets out, and then he relapses because he gets out, he can't get a job, and he has no health care and no health insurance to treat his disease. And so he ends up back in prison. 40% of the adult men who are in prison have some serious mental health illness. And it disproportionately affects the Black community because of the intergenerational inequality that has happened. And so the lack of access to those kinds of resources, the healthcare, the treatment, the things that people need to live productive lives. And so healthcare reform itself, I hope, will help reduce some of that disparity, because people just, they need to be able to see a doctor to get substance abuse treatment. I have a cousin who is addicted to drugs, and she is lost to us. And I don't even know where to start to find her help, because we don't have health insurance. There's no health insurance coverage for her. So there's no way to get her help. So I think those are some of the answers. I know we'll talk about some other issues as well going forward.
Well, I just want to first acknowledge Representative Karen Bennett out of Stone Mountain, HD 94. Thank you for joining us this evening. And perfect that you were just talking about healthcare, because that's our next question. And we will have Komela Williams and Prudence Franklin speak about this one. COVID-19 has disproportionately affected Black and Brown people across Georgia and the country. Additionally, the maternal mortality rate for Black women in Georgia is 6 times the national average. What is your experience with Georgia's healthcare system, and what would you like your representative to address within our healthcare system?
So this particular topic is pretty near and dear to me, because back in February, I lost my job and the healthcare went with it. They were gracious enough to let me keep the healthcare for my family until the end of May. But since May, we haven't had healthcare. And I've tried to get healthcare. However, and I do support the Affordable Health Care Act. I do support that, and I did try to go out to the healthcare.gov to get my family coverage, because my husband, he works, but he is a contractor, so that means that I will be responsible for the healthcare insurance. Well, it's not very. First of all, the website itself is not very. And I consider myself a professional. I have a master's degree, so I'm a techie, so I'm pretty, I'm pretty versed and tech savvy to be able to, fill out an application. But it's not the best. It's not user, what's the word I'm looking for?
User friendly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is it's not affordable. They have it set up to where it's not affordable. It just isn't. And even if we do get it, or even if they finally do approve us for it, not everyone accepts it. So now we have that issue of who will even accept it, because a lot of people are against it, medical practitioners, to where they won't even accept it. And that's just one portion of it. I have a girlfriend that literally just had a baby yesterday, and she lives in a rural area. And the baby had some minor complications, but they were overwhelming for the hospital. So the baby had to be flown to a nearby closer hospital, so that here in Georgia, so that, he could get the care that he needs in NICU. So now you have the issue of the rural areas not having adequate healthcare systems, hospitals. A lot of the rural areas, there aren't OBGYNs or certain doctors out there. So I guess my question to you would be, how do we fix all that? How do we get everyone to have adequate quality healthcare all over, not just in the inner city, not just in the suburbs, but what about the rural areas? Like we have to have this. Like, how are we to stay healthy? It's sad that I have life insurance, but I don't have healthcare.
I hope, I'm so glad we are recording this, because I want to go back and revisit, and remember these stories, because it is, yeah, it's very frustrating to me. So the Affordable Care Act passed, and there were all sorts of funding streams that were passed as a part of it that were meant to bring down the cost of health insurance. And the Republicans, when they won in the Congress, refused to allocate those funds to the Affordable Care Act. Instead, they took it, and eventually they passed an enormous corporate tax cut bill, right? They cut taxes for the ultra wealthy and for large corporations. And basically that money was repurposed for that. And so all of us are left with extortionary health insurance rates. under President Trump in 2017, as he cut. So Obama then moved some money around to try to shore up the health insurance on the exchange. It was imperfect because it was not congressionally approved. But then when Trump won, he took those funds and refused to reallocate them into the exchange to reduce the price. So for families that are making over around $75,000 a year, if you're protected somewhat, if you're kind of in sort of a middle range income, but if you're over around 75, it depends on the family and children and stuff, you are not protected. And so what happened was when he pulled those funds out, the insurance rates went up by 50% in 2017 alone. And that has just left lots of families just staggering under the cost of health insurance. The failure to expand Medicaid in Georgia is one of the big reasons that the rural parts of the state are suffering so badly. And I still am floored that people in rural Georgia are supporting Republicans. I'm sorry, I know you don't want to be partisan. I'm trying not to be, but it's hard to say it otherwise. They would have gotten, so the state would have received $2.2 to $3 billion a year. And of that, a very healthy chunk would have gone to rural Georgia. I think around 1.7 billion. You'd have to fact check me on that, but it was a good, healthy chunk of that money. And that would have helped shore up those rural hospitals and those rural healthcare systems. Now, I think 2 recently have closed their doors. Around 8 had already shut down since 2010. And I don't understand. But part of the reason I got into this was I cannot sit here while we have in this district alone 120,000 people without health insurance and a representative who is not doing anything about that. I have worked in public policy my entire life, and what my job often was when I worked for members of Congress was to analyze the impact of every piece of legislation on the people that they represented. And they have stopped doing that. They don't seem to care or make that connection. So that is my frustration, and that we need to go up there. This must be fixed. And we can go back, we can shore up the Affordable Care Act, get it back on its feet, but also introduce a public option so that if the health insurance, the private companies on the exchange are not able to offer a competitive rate, we have a public option to create a low cost alternative for you and your family, and also for small businesses that also really struggle to cover their employees or to cover themselves. And this is just front and center. I mean, beyond that, you know, we see the healthcare disparity. We need to go and make sure that we are addressing disparities in treatment as well. So we saw 80% of the people in hospitals from COVID were Black. And that also is out there affecting the Black community. And that kind of disparity, you know, we need to get to the heart of it, and we need to address those kinds of issues. Build in not structural equity into our system.
Prudence, I wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe address this as well.
Oh, yeah.
So Carolyn, I mean, so, you know, my feeling is, you know, every 4 years, politicians come in front of us as the Black community and they tell us, you know, all these platitudes, what can be done, what should be done. So what concrete ideas do you have to address health disparities? I mean, you know, we look at Serena Williams, who is almost a billionaire if she's not, going to the hospital, having her baby and being told she just has a headache. She's confused when she was having an embolism. Now, you know, for it to happen to somebody like her, imagine what would happen with me and with, you know, lower income women. So, you know, you telling us, yes, you know, things need to be done. What concrete ideas do you have to address the disparities?
Some of it's obviously tied to the training of medical professionals. And my sister is a doctor and actually offers a course in racism in medicine. And they talk very specifically about those kinds of issues, about the racism that doctors bring to a particular medical situation where they are very dismissive of a Black person's problems. A woman too, as a woman, I have also experienced that, where the doctor's like, oh, it's all in your head. And so part of it, I think, is training and ensuring. So the federal government provides a lot of money for medical training. When people go into residency, the federal government subsidizes the salary of people who are in residency, subsidizes those hospitals that do medical student training. And they have certain criteria and around that training. And so making sure that embedded in that criteria around medical student training is recognition of racism and addressing those kinds of issues. We need to have a conversation. Part of it is I do need to have a better understanding of where it's happening, where that breakdown is happening. Is it happening in research? Because that's something else, right? When they go out and they research different medications, well, they tested in a 5'10" white man or whatever that standard is, and often don't recognize that it has a differential impact on different communities. So I know there's been a lot of effort to try to address how we test our medications, how we do research on them, to recognize some of the racial differences that sort of how things may be happening to different communities. So I think there are lots and lots of pieces of this, and it is partly continuing the conversation with people like you to find ways to insert ourselves to start to address those kinds of problems.
And I'd like to say, Ms. Dr. Bordeaux, I just finished reading a book called The Checklist Manifesto. Okay. And in that book, they talked about how hospitals got better because they have, every doctor, nurse has now a checklist before they can sign off on a patient. So I'm just putting it out there. A checklist, you have to ask every patient these kind of questions based on this illness that they've come in with. So it doesn't matter what the skin color of the patient is. Everyone must be asked these questions, and it should be checked by a supervisor, by a, every single day, every week, whatever. To me, that's one way maybe we can even address it.
That is a great idea. Yeah.
I'm muted. Okay, great. Thank you all. Thank you, Prudence and Camila, for sharing. The next question is for Chris Hankins. The economic collapse due to the coronavirus pandemic has so far resulted in hundreds of thousands of Georgians out of work and thousands of small businesses shuttered. We are facing the most severe economic crisis since the Great Depression of the 1930s. How can we get Georgia's economy back on track?
Well, first of all, the pandemic, probably an overused word right about now is unprecedented, but I'll use it again. Given that it was unprecedented, it's not a short-term solution. So I would like to offer up a couple of long-term solutions, because this is not going to be an overnight fix. And so, number one, I believe that we have to spur economic development in our rural areas. And I've heard the term rural thrown around this call a couple of times. But I think we need to build density into our economy here in the metro area, particularly in the rural and suburban areas. And what I mean by that is I don't need to see our city planners and our economic development authorities bring another Chick-fil-A or another Chipotle and throwing that. That's not economic development. That's the first thing. That's just one less fast food. That's one more fast food joint that we can all get fat on. All right. So economic development, in my opinion, doesn't look like that. It's industry. So I'll move to point number two. I don't understand why there's not more investment in the technology space, and particularly in the healthcare industry. Those are the two sexy or hot or whatever you want to call it industries right now. And I need to see more innovation, more collaboration around how do we bring tech jobs? How do we expand healthcare jobs and in the health industry that's going to just create more and more jobs. And thirdly, which builds off of that, is, we've got to find a way to tap into the millennials. Guys, I don't know if you realize it or not, but the millennials are the largest generation right now. You're looking at over 72.6 million millennials compared to 71 for baby boomers. They've overtaken my moms and pops. And so the sooner we figure out how to cater to the interests of the millennials and use their talents, leverage their talents into creating jobs, and then attracting them to areas, our local economies will start to grow, will start to blossom, will start to boom. And then, my last point again is we need to challenge individuals that are in these decision making positions on how did they come to that decision to bring another Burger King. Like, if I look at rural areas, let's take, for instance, Tuscaloosa County out in Alabama, the Mercedes-Benz plant, been many years, but that was a rural area, nothing there but trees. I traveled there many times on the road home to Mississippi to visit my mom, but that Mercedes-Benz plant brought 3,700 jobs to Tuscaloosa County. And from that 3,700 jobs they brought, another 40,000 jobs were created from offspring industries. Why we're not challenging our local authorities and our local leaders to think this way, I don't know why. I live in Tequila, Gwinnett County. It's a beautiful place. Every other street corner, there's another housing development that's going up, or another Chipotle or Chick-fil-A, but I don't see anybody constructing buildings that are going to attract. I don't see any buildings going up that are going to attract technology companies, or that are going to keep our millennials working within Gwinnett County, within the suburbs, and not taking their talents inside the perimeter. Those are the things that I would offer up, and I would challenge each of you to keep me honest on that.
All right. So back in the day, I've done a lot of work in economic development, and thinking about that, I have a lot of those fast food restaurants, they are franchises, so often small businesses and run by local families. So I appreciate, but I also appreciate what you're saying. And I have, there are these organizations. The Gwinnett Chamber is very involved in this. Partnership Gwinnett, very involved in trying to bring more of that high-tech, biotech type industry into the county. And one of the major barriers that they face right now, I don't know if you followed, they have a big development going on out in Tequila, where they are trying to bring in more of the tech business. One of the big barriers, though, is transit and transportation in Gwinnett. And I have talked with a number of business people, including West Rock, which was manufacturing in Norcross. And they pulled up stakes and moved downtown because people can't get out here anymore. And so one of the things I actually have worked on for many years, I worked on with Ron Wyden, was transit and transportation policy. And and of course, there's going to be the ballot referendum. If you guys are voting, there's the ballot referendum to bring transit into Gwinnett, not only to bring, to extend MARTA into Gwinnett, but also to have transit options within Gwinnett itself. And one of the hardest things is just getting around rush hour, right? Just sitting on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard for hours at a time. And we need really enhanced mobility. I talked to a guy who owns some commercial property in Peachtree Corners, and he actually had trouble refinancing his property because the bank was like, we don't know how people are going to get out here to actually occupy this building. So the first thing is to work on that. And what we need if we're going to get that kind of investment in this community is, one, to make sure the community itself, right, is adopting the 1 cent sales tax. But also you need a federal partner. And what typically happens when you're doing this kind of transportation expansion is to have the local community put up some money, but also the federal government come and help match that money to amplify it. And, you know, that is something I worked on for years. I helped get funding for Portland, Oregon's light rail system. And I think that is one place to start. There's obviously a lot that needs to be done, but that is one place that we can start and have, you know, I can have a very positive impact potentially on the community by helping bring back those dollars to the district. So that's one thing I've thought about. I do have a sort of a whole set of small business initiatives. What I hear from small businesses is they need capital. A lot of small businesses really struggle with that. And so it's expanding community development financial institutions. James, you work for SBA, right? Going to people like James and expanding some SBA programs out there also to help small businesses. And those are, you know, one of, you know, several things I can do constructively to help with some of those issues.
Thank you, Carolyn. Our next question is about education, which is something I know a lot of people are really interested in. For many Black students, racism is first experienced in the classroom with disproportionate disciplinary actions, which begin the school to prison pipeline. In addition, schools in low-income areas tend to not have equal resources to schools in higher income areas. What is your plan to address inequities in our education system and to ensure all children have access to a world-class education? And I will pass this question to Manuel Solomon.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. I'd like to start by telling a story about a young black boy who was a part of that pipeline to prison. And he was able to use that pipeline as an educational tool to tell his story to others. It began in a small rural town in Mississippi. And he always wondered why he had to be bused to the other high school, and the other high school, which was segregated, of course, why, in order to take pre-cal or calculus or chemistry, any advanced level education courses, you had to be bussed over. Why couldn't he get that same education at his school, which was predominantly Black? So when you ask what can we do to change those things, I say we need to continue to make sure that we vote, first of all, so our voices are heard. We need to continue to stay engaged, not just when it's a federal election, but our local elections, our statewide elections. Those are the ones that matter most. Those are the ones that immediately impact our communities, our local neighborhoods. We understand, we always, like Ms. Franklin said, we tend to wait to the national election before we engage, but we have to be there every time, all the time, staying engaged. I personally, I want to continue to tell my story because I was that young boy that was in that pipeline without the understanding, but educating myself. Although all the resources weren't there at my school, I didn't let it become that stumbling block in my life. I used it to educate myself and see how I can make a difference. And then to continue with that, I passed it on to the next generation to let them know where I started and how I was able to overcome. And I'm just hoping by staying engaged again and doing my part that we can see a difference there. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Of course, I'm a big fan of voting, and I agree. And we have some great school board candidates who are running in Gwinnett. Tanisha Banks, Karen Watkins, who are up, who I think will make some significant change, and of course, Everton Blair, who was elected back in 2018. And so I think there's a lot that's going to be changing, certainly in Gwinnett, with education and increased awareness of the issues that the very diverse communities across Gwinnett face. I've been working with Black Men United for Children and Humanity to talk with them about disproportionate disciplinary proceedings in schools, and to continue to kind of brainstorm about ways to address that in Gwinnett. And they have several initiatives that I'm supporting in that area. And beyond that, expanding universal pre-K, there's investments. And one of the challenges we face now is making investments in ourselves and our children and our future. And so making sure that we move towards universal pre-K, so all of our children start school ready to learn, making sure that our teachers, are paid enough and also receive good training and support. And then making sure that people who graduate, young people who graduate, have a clear career pathway. We make college affordable, and there are a number of strategies that we need to invest in to make sure that nobody is barred from going to college because they can't afford it. And then opening the door to other opportunities such as apprenticeships and internships. And these are all just sort of pieces of the platform that I have put out there. But I enjoy hearing your stories so much more than I do talking about the platforms that I've got, which is kind of dry. But I'm the daughter of teachers, and I care about schools and teaching. I've got an 8-year-old son, and the most important person in my life is his 3rd grade teacher. So I deeply appreciate the importance of education.
Thank you both. We've come to our final question of the evening, which will go to Representative Karen Bennett and Alex Northington. Thank you so much for being so patient while we got to your question. But this is about voting. This election is more important than ever. However, the pandemic has caused many uncertainties in our voting system. What ways can we all safely vote in this election? And what is your plan for securing voting rights for all citizens once elected, Carolyn?
You're asking Carolyn or Karen?
Karen first.
Well, first of all, let me thank you, Ms. Miller and Ms. Bordeaux, for inviting me. I have thoroughly enjoyed all of the answers and all of the areas that you have touched on. And quite frankly, have a particular keen interest in racial injustice. And I'll get to the answer to your question in just a moment. But I'd just like to add how the disparities and the implicit and explicit biases and penetrate every aspect of our lives, which creates that systemic racism. I did my capstone doctoral studies in implicit and explicit cultural disparities and cultural competency training, particularly in the healthcare. And someone mentioned how African Americans, brown people, and people of color and poor people get such a lower and lesser quality of healthcare in many regards, which creates the disparities. So it's not just the medical services; it's also the economic status, the health insurance, the education, the disparities in home ownership. We talked about workforce development. Every aspect of our lives, Black and brown people are confronted with systemic racism. And so getting to the bottom of that, I believe, will start with training. Someone mentioned training, education at an early age. We can't wait until professionals get into professional schools. We can't wait until policemen get into police academies to begin to penetrate and teach and talk about the ills and the harms of implicit and explicit racism. And why do we need to talk about it? We need to talk about it so that we can increase awareness. And if I know what's wrong with me, or if I know something is going on with me, then I'll be more likely to try to do something about it. So that's one thing. How do we go all the way back to K through 12 and begin to have substantial training as part of the educational system, so that by the time young adults and these millennials get into their professional training and the professional lives and come out into the world, that some of that may have been overcome. through training from an early age. I wanted to say that. I was given the task to talk about racial injustice, and that's why I wanted to talk about it before we got to the safety and voting. And we could probably sum it up to say Black lives do matter. Black Lives Matter is not just a mantra, it's not just a slogan, it's not just a saying. It's a recapturing of where we are today and thinking we were at a different place, but realizing that we are where we are. And voting matters. Why does voting matter? Voting matters because it puts people into office who can address or share your values. It puts people into office who will accept Medicaid expansion. It puts people into office who will do something with student loans. It puts people into office who can make policy decisions on criminal justice reform. So that's why voting matters. And so how can we do it in a safe and unintimidated way? Well, first of all, we have to recognize the signs of voter suppression. We have to recognize the signs of voter suppression. We have to recognize the fear tactics. We have to recognize the spewing of the intimidation that says vote by mail, it's something crooked or wrong with it. That's just a intimidation factor. To say that people will be at the polls watching to make sure you do something or don't do something that you're not supposed to do, that's intimidation. Only poll workers are allowed to be, certified poll workers are allowed to be in voter precincts. So first we have to know before we go. We have to know before we go. We have to know what the issues are, what the referendums are that we're voting on. We have to know what the amendments mean before we go. Now, when we go to vote in person, we have to make sure that we are protected by the CDC guidelines. And we can't expect for an institution or facility to ensure our safety. We have to take self-responsibility. What does that mean? That means we have to wear a mask. Some instances we have to wear gloves or make sure we have hand sanitizer. We have to treat everyone other than your family who you know or may not know as though they may be infected. So with self-responsibility, when we go, and I encourage everyone to go for early voting. Early voting in Georgia started on Monday, October the 12th. Go, and before you go, know before you go, what is your vote plan? What is your vote plan? What is your plan if you encounter a long line? What is your plan if you encounter some disruption? What is your plan if you're able to walk through the lines and vote and get out of there? So how do we remain safe? We remain safe mentally and physically. And I threw that mental piece in there because we want to make sure that our voters are not intimidated. We want to make sure that our voters are assured that when they go to the poll to vote, that their vote will be cast and their vote will count. Now those are for the in-person voters. For those who choose to vote early by mail, make sure that that form is filled out completely. Make sure that your ovals are blackened completely, because if the ovals are not blackened completely, that's a reason for the machine to spit it out. Make sure that your signature doesn't just change today. Make sure that you are consistent with your signature. And then you have a choice of knowing before you go, knowing where, if you're going to go to the drop box, know where your drop boxes are. Know where your drop boxes are. And if you're going to vote by mail, make sure that that your ballot has a stamp on it. And make sure that if you're voting by mail, that you mail your ballot at least 10 days before the election. If you are within 10 days of November 3rd, mask up, hand sanitize up, suit up, man and woman up, and go to the poll, protecting yourself with your face wear, your face garment, and your protective hand sanitizers. Did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am, it did. Alex, do you have anything you'd like to add, sir?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Representative Bennett, excuse me. She covered a lot in there. I'm going to go ahead and touch a little bit more on some more nuanced areas of voter suppression and how to combat it, in addition to what Representative Bennett said. We're all familiar with the old school direct methods of voter suppression, such as poll taxes, poll tests, and outright prohibition of a particular demographic from voting at the polls. What we're seeing now is a lot more nuanced and indirect, such as one I never thought of, the mail service removing mailboxes from a lot of these largely Democratic areas. I mean, you got to hand it to them. The brilliance is actually amazing, but also changing people's registration status or moving them from the voting roll, moving their polling place from year to year without notification, or the big thing that we're now seeing, shutting down of all the additional polling locations, and thus putting individuals that go to the 1 or 2 or 3 remaining locations through an excessive wait time and whatever elements that particular day in Georgia is going to bring. Ways to combat this, and this is one of the things that we discuss within our chapter. Well, first and foremost, I do it several times a year. I saw a few chats where people put out the website to the Georgia Secretary of State. Check your status often, especially 45, 30, and maybe even 15 days again before any election you plan on voting in, which really should be all of them. Early voting. Now, usually we see a lot less hindrances than we do now, and I actually attribute some of that, hopefully, to the excitement of the current voter rolls, but also to people trying to avoid extended wait times in a COVID environment. My biggest one is absentee ballot. I dropped mine off at the Board of Elections 2 days ago, actually. Walked right up to the drop box, past the 250 people in line. And the big thing that I like about the absentee ballots as well is you can go online and check your status after you've filled out the application, when it's been mailed to you, when they've received it, and so forth. And I believe also when they tabulate it. The final thing I'd like to say, though, regarding that, and this is a biggie, and please, all of you on the panel and you all also in the audience, take it back to your coworkers, friends, your respective organizations, and that is provisional ballots. If you get to a particular polling location and they say you don't have their ID, you're at the wrong place, yada, 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 you should immediately ask for a provisional ballot, which will record your ballot and your information. And supposedly that will be counted once they are able to verify that you are eligible to vote. So as a last line of defense here, please, if you know of anyone, or prepare them if they get there and they're trying to tell them they're at the wrong place, and that person says, well, I'm not going to go to another school here and wait another 8 hours, they need to ask for a provisional ballot and complete it at that moment. And that's pretty much all that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pass it off to Carolyn. First, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, everyone in the audience, all of our panelists for joining us today. I just really, really appreciate, taking the time, and these are issues that are very important to the campaign. So we're glad to have this conversation, this roundtable conversation tonight. And with that being said, Carolyn, close us out.
Well, I can't do better than Representative Bennett and Alec. They did. They gave us all the information we need. Please make a plan to vote. We are encouraging absentee ballots. If you have an absentee ballot and you're comfortable using it, it will help you avoid the long lines. And once you drop it into a drop box, or once it's received, it is recorded by the Secretary of State. So MVP vote.sos.ga.gov. And you can go there and check to make sure that they have received your absentee ballot. And just so you know, once it's recorded that they've received it, the campaign gets that information. And so we can make sure it gets counted. And so just, we are watching those very, very carefully. And we have not seen, there are some issues with requesting it and then getting it. There's a delay in Gwinnett for that. But once you get it back in, we have seen that has gone very smoothly. And we are tracking it. Kyla's been posting all our voter protection work that we're doing as a campaign, the Democratic Party is doing, as well as Fair Fight is really watching this carefully. People are getting out there. It is heartwarming. The people are out there with a plan. Representative Bennett, you would be so proud. I saw this woman, she had her lawn chair, she had her lunchbox, and she went to go sit in line and make sure that her vote was counted. And we are seeing an extraordinary outpouring of people doing early vote. We've had a 400% increase in early vote at this time over what was happening in 2016. So we need to keep that going. There are long lines, but don't stop. Don't let that deter you. As mask up, bring your lawn chair, make your plan, and we are all fighting for that vote. So thank you guys so much for being here. It's an honor to be with you all. And, you know, and please, please, yes, I appreciate all you guys are doing to make sure you support voting in this district. It is so important.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Have a good
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.